New Buddhaware Dhamma Talks. Geoff Hunt presents a talk on some aspect of the Buddha's teaching.
Everyone, you may know that what we're going to talk about today is fragility, that is being fragile. Let's start with something very simple. You probably at some point in your life received a parcel, or when you're moving house or something, and there's a box which says fragile on the side. What does it mean? It means that it's easily broken. So now let's transfer that. We human beings, we are fragile as well. Fragile physically, fragile mentally or psychologically, fragile in so many ways. How would we capture the main thing here? Well, let's start with the individual who is said to be fragile, or you may believe that you are fragile, which is a slightly different thing, because then there's going to be feedback and you're going to become what you believe you are. We hear a lot on television about, for example, a fragile economy at the moment, or fragile political situation. Let's put all of that aside as far as we can. Make it simple. Being fragile is easily feeling hurt. Now, there's the fragility that we all have, and then there's the fragility that some people have more than others. Some of us are very sensitive. That's not necessarily a bad thing at all. Vulnerable, feeling of weakness. And of course, it is something that we all experience, is that in life, we may feel very strong on some occasions, or even sometimes for some years. And then something changes and we feel very fragile. And we might realize that the strength we thought we had is actually on the surface. So it's like a shell. So maybe we're all a bit like an egg in the sense that it has a shell on the outside. But how thick is the shell? When the egg is dropped, well, it depends how far you drop it. Drop it a long way, it's going to break. If you drop it a little way, then it'll probably not break. Some beings are psychologically and mentally, morally. So we are all really like breakable glass. It depends on the circumstances, and it depends on how thick the glass is. There's no doubt that some of us are stronger than others, but it's not a competition. It's about, understanding oneself and learning some ways of training oneself to be stronger. And also to see that being sensitive is not necessarily a bad thing. Some of the greatest people we've ever had have been very sensitive people, easily hurt. So if we could put it in a nutshell, we might say being fragile is being or feeling weak or uncertain and unlikely to be able to resist strong pressure. That's what it says. But I think we have to take a broader view than that. What do we mean by pressure? What sort of pressure? For how long is this pressure? Is it pressure at all? Can I deal with it? Can I reduce the pressure? There's so many questions that can be asked. Nearly all of us will be fragile, that is, easily hurt in some areas, but not in others. So I may feel very strong in certain circumstances. I wonder why other people are feeling so sensitive about it. whereas then sometimes it's turned around the other way. So I'm the one feeling very sensitive and hurt, and everybody else is thinking, what's the problem? So there's quite a subjective dimension to this. Sensitivity, of course, can lead to overreaction to situations. Situations are often sometimes connected with our past or what we may have suffered in the past, will somehow still be buried there some way if we don't think about them. So we may overreact. Now we see this very sharply in relationships with your boyfriend, girlfriend, brother, sister, husband, wife. The people we are closest together are closest to those buttons they can press, whether accidentally or even deliberately sometimes. We know how to hurt people that are close to us because we know where their sensitivities are. But of course, to do that deliberately is cruel. And often one does do something like that because one is trying to defend oneself, because one has one's own sensitivities. But then this breaks down into quarrels, slanging matches, resentment, anger, not liking each other. Because instead of working together with the sensitivities or identifying them, we are using them as weapons. Not a good idea, really. We will all lose out if we are using sensitivities as weapons. So what is the opposite of, it helps us to think about what is the opposite of fragility, of being fragile? Well, a lot of different words come to mind. Being strong. Strength is one obvious thing, but what do we mean by strength? We're not talking here necessarily about physical strength, of course. You can be physically quite weak, but psychologically very strong. The opposite then is strength, but it's also a certain kind of wisdom, and that wisdom can come with practicing mindfulness in all walks of life. Wisdom, knowing how to dodge the sensitive spots, or to say, oh, there it is again. I'm aware of it now. That puts me in a different place. Don't let it carry you away. The opposite then is also resilience, knowing how to deal with one's sensitive spots, not by hating them or fighting with them, by just acknowledging them, patting them on the head and moving on. So the word sturdy also comes to mind. We come back to that box with fragile glass on the side. We have kind of a sturdy box. Now, that too is a little bit complicated because is sturdiness always a good thing? Sturdiness sometimes can be a kind of aggressive state, a readiness to fight or to reject, to protect oneself. But that then hinders one's capacity to grow in wisdom and meet others or encounter others with some understanding and patience. So if we look at it now, let's broaden our view of this, as we do when we look at things from the point of view of the Dhamma, that is the wider view. Well, one thing we will notice is that, in a sense, all life is fragile. It has to be that way. So there is nothing extraordinary about fragility. Look at the flowers in your garden, or the herbs that you're growing, or the grass on the lawn. All of it is fragile. It's connected with anicca, that is impermanence. Impermanence is a fact. So there should be no great surprise when you're feeling hurt by something or other. You can say to yourself, of course I'm hurt. Of course I'm fragile. Show me the human being that is not fragile. If a human being has no fragility at all, then that becomes a problem for them. They're missing out on life. So in a sense, we have to expose ourselves in order to enjoy life. You say, you're taking risks. Well, okay, take risks. Again, that's how it is. Okay? But all of it, when you think of it, you know, when we start surveying it, it starts to sound rather complicated, as though we've got to juggle with all these different things. It all boils down to a view of life which is wiser and more patient, and acknowledging the transitoriness of it all, but not in an aggressive or cynical way. So if we look at it in a wider perspective, as fragility is, in a sense, up to a point, natural, ordinary, everyday, because we're all like that glass bottle, and we need to be careful, but not so careful that we're shutting ourselves down. Now, take the wider view, you will see fragility as you grow older. So when we're a little baby, of course, we're extremely fragile and we need mummy to look after us, okay? And we panic if mummy goes out of sight. That's very fragile. But that's how it is at 2 years of age. Now you go into your 20s, and suddenly we don't feel fragile anymore. Now we're going to fly all over the world, take all sorts of risks, meet all sorts of people, do all sorts of exciting things. Again, that's how it is at that age. You know, I'm a father and a grandfather, and when I see some of my grandchildren, for example, going into their teenage years, we know there's going to be some interesting situations for us to deal with. They're now taking risks which we, the elder people, think are unreasonable risks. That's because we have become more fragile ourselves. So now we see the world as being fragile because we ourselves have become more fragile. This is even physically true. Your bones become more fragile. The blood system becomes more fragile. What doesn't become more fragile? Your energy becomes more fragile. You can use it up more quickly. Your hair becomes more fragile and starts falling out. Oh, thank you very much. Didn't realize you were going to do that. Well, that's how it is. So wisdom is having a broader view of your life and taking it in its stride and making adjustments for yourself and for other people, and not living in a fantasy land and thinking however it is now is how it's always going to be. You can be sure it isn't. We've got a pandemic. Who would have expected that even the day before? Would we have expected that? And while they were fighting the pandemic in the USA, they then suddenly have a minus 40-degree blizzard. They thought, oh, how unfair. We're just trying to overcome this. And then that comes along. Of course, we don't think of how much of that is due to our own behavior, but that's another question. A lot of the question of fragility can be answered in relation to the ego. That is, what the Buddha is very interested in is how we construct the self. Sometimes we construct ourselves in a way that makes us very fragile. Other times we don't really, we're not really aware of the possibility of changing our ways or changing our thoughts, changing our ideas, because we don't really notice this flow of thoughts and feelings going through our minds. So you could sum up a lot of the Buddha's teaching is the word I use, which he doesn't use, but it says something for me, is the importance of decentering. By decentering, I mean taking yourself away from the center of things. Because however it may look to you, in reality, you are not the center of things. So in a way, you are the center of things because the whole world starts from you and you're looking out the window. Okay. So in a sense, you are the center of things. But we can get very carried away with that. And we get harsh reminders in life that you are not, in fact, the center of things. When there's a pandemic, it doesn't choose people. It doesn't choose. It's not as though the naughty ones are going to get the virus and all the well-behaved ones are going to be rewarded. It doesn't work like that. Right? So decentering is important. That is getting in balance the sense that I'm the center of the world, which has some truth in it, and the other end, which says you popped into the world without asking for it, and you will pop out without asking for it. So where is this great center of the world? You have very little control over it. But that's okay. That's how it is. Wisdom often lies just in accepting the way things are. Not always, but often it does amount to that. Okay, so watch that ego. So many of our practices have to do with the ego or the self. When you're meditating, letting go of the self, becoming part of the whatever you want to call it, the one, if you like. There was a 3rd century philosopher called Plotinus. He never mentioned God or anything like that. He just said the one. The one is all, everything, the universe, if you like. And how each one of us is part of the universe. And that is where our greatness lies. If only our focus could be more on the fact that I am just a spark in a great, great, great universe without end. Wouldn't that reorientate me? So part of the wisdom that comes with the practices is seeing yourself as part of something great, unfathomable, and ineffable. It's hard to put that across. Well, let's come back to some nitty-gritty things. Now, again, it will have been noticed by many of you when you have felt hurt by the way things have worked out, is that perhaps I had a false expectation. Well, not all expectations are false. I mean, we've got to work with expectations. Sometimes things don't go the way I expected. And then I think, oh, I had a false expectation. Well, maybe you did, but maybe you didn't. Maybe you just had an expectation. How are we going to get through life without some expectations? So don't beat yourself up every time things go wrong and tell yourself, I had a false expectation there. So the point I think is quite important. Expecting what you cannot in fact get is a pretty sad state of affairs. Sometimes we know you just sit by yourself and think, am I expecting what I can't actually get? It's futile. It'll cause a lot of unhappiness. Right? Expecting what you can't get, that is sort of being needy, always needy. I need something, I need more, I need this, I need that. People don't understand me. Well, okay, there's some truth in it, but don't get carried away with it, you know, because now you're defining your life by your neediness. There's a great part of you. It's a great part of every one of us. That's what we've got to tap into, not this neediness thing. We're saying, Mummy, 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 help me. Okay. Fragility can lead to jealousy, it can lead to hatred. People do the horrible things that they sometimes do because things are not turning out, or they're not the way that they want them to be. So they try to force things to be a certain way. It's aggression, hatred. It's a very sad state of affairs. Okay, if we come to practices, a lot of people will say, well, I understand the practices, the mindfulness, etc. I understand that now, but somehow I keep falling back. So I can't really sustain it. Now and then I seem to get a glimpse, but a lot of the time I just seem to fall back. I can hear that phrase, I keep falling back. Well, has it ever occurred to you that falling back is the way it is? Falling back, happens with everything. Let's say you want to play tennis. Are you going to play tennis properly, well, etc., without falling back? You're going to fall back and you're going to overcome. You're going to fall back again, you're going to overcome. You're going to fall back, you're going to overcome. Welcome to life. Falling back is okay. But pick yourself up. You're not too fragile for the path because you are the path. So how can you be too fragile for the path? One metaphor I like to use is that following the Dhamma is like climbing a hill. Right at the very top of the hill, where maybe you can see one faint character waving, which is so far away you think I'll never get there. Let's say that's the person who's reached nirvana. Now, are you a failure because you've only gone 2 kilometers up the hill and this person's in nirvana? So I'm a failure, I'll never do that. This is a misunderstanding. It's a hill with a path on it. Every step you take up the path is to your benefit, is an increase in your wisdom. You don't have to get to the top. You just have to go where you're going and do what you can do. Every step you take up the hill is leading you into greater wisdom, greater peace, peace of mind, greater patience with others. You see, look at it this way. If you take a couple of steps up the hill, guess what? You can now see further than you could see before. Now we take another 2 steps up the hill. Now we can see further than we could last time I moved up the hill. Every time I move up the hill, I'm seeing further. I'm understanding more. And at the core of it all, I'm seeing the amazing beauty of life. So don't try to get to the top. Don't even think about the top. Just think about the next step. That every time I take a step, I'm going to be able to see that little bit further. Very positive way at looking at understanding what all these practices are about. We've got the metta bhavana practice, we've got concentration practice, we've got mindfulness practice. It's all one thing. Opening up your mind. A positive thing, perhaps to remember now and then, is that some of the most fragile, sensitive people have been the greatest people in terms of special talents, special insights. Well, you will notice that I'm a bit of an academic. You probably noticed that by now. Take someone like Franz Kafka, who was an author. Very, very sensitive, suffered a lot from his sensitivity, and yet he's remembered as one of the greatest writers of all time. Or Kierkegaard, a philosopher. Very, very sensitive, hurt by everything all the time. Nobody understood him, and he got angry. He got angry with people, and then they laughed at him, and when they laughed at him, he felt worse. But Kierkegaard is remembered as one of the greatest philosophers, one of the deepest because of his sensitivity, not in spite of it. Okay, what about when, you know, the jug or the cup or whatever has been dropped and it did break. It did break. And it can break, and sometimes we call it a mental breakdown, or just a huge shock in life. I mean, we're all susceptible to that. What do we do about that? Now, I have broken, if you like. Well, the next thing is to start putting yourself together again, isn't it? Because a broken jug can be repaired, or maybe we can make a new jug, but at least we can patch up the old jug. We don't have to throw it away, which is giving up. It could be that every time you fix the broken jug, you're making it stronger. I was told this once by, I think, a nurse who, when I was 4 years old, I broke my leg. I was always very busy running around, and I broke my leg. And then I was a bit of a worrier at the same time. So on the one hand, I was, you know, running about doing pretty silly things. On the other hand, I was quite sensitive. So I used to worry about whether my leg was going to be the same as before, and so on and so forth. And the nurse told me it's going to be stronger. Because when the two ends of the bone get together and they suddenly grow into each other, if you break your leg again, it probably won't be that spot. So you're getting stronger, not weaker. I've always kept that in my mind, because by saying that, she had changed everything about the way I looked at my leg. Nothing wrong with my leg now. You can't see that I've broken it. Although if I run my fingers along bone, I can just feel where I think I can feel where it was broken. Okay, I'm going to end with a few words from Pema Chodron, who know Canadian herself, I think. And some of you will have read her writings. One that you may know is a book called The Places That Scare You, which I dipped into again yesterday, not having looked at it for some years. And I picked out a part which I think is very wise. Pema Chodron, she says, this is what she says: how do we abide with disagreeable emotions without retreating into our familiar strategies? So how do we abide? How do we go on with living with our disagreeable emotions, the emotions that are hurtful, without retreating into our familiar way of dealing with that, which can be, e.g., blame, the favorite. And another one is anger. So how do I deal with that? Instead of retreating, she sees it as a retreat. Well, she goes on, we are determined to find a way to realize our kinship with others. It's just one good idea, is to see your humanity, not everybody else's humanity, yours. You are a member of the gang, right? All 8 billion of us. You are one of them, and you count as much as anybody else. So she says, realize your kinship with others, that you are connected with others, even when you may think there's a huge gap between you and others. Be determined to keep training in opening our mind. And that is where the metta bhavana practice, the concentration, the mindfulness, the self-awareness, these are our practices. Keep training in opening our mind. It's a slow process. It's not a quick fix. It's not a pill that you can take. You have to persevere. So you have to have a little confidence, but beware of those expectations. It may be a slower process than you think. There are people who I know who have said, it took me about 10 years before suddenly it all dropped. Other people get it almost immediately, and so on. But you see, we're back to that little hill that we have to climb. Every step you take up the hill is giving you a wider view. So that is what Pema Chodron has to say in a book called The Places That Scare You. If you want to look at the book. Pema Chodron. Chodron is Chodron. Chodron. The Places That Scare You. Right, so much for fragility. I'm going to hand you over now to Lynn, who will administer or facilitate a discussion. You may have lots of questions or comments, observations that you'd like to make, because I think this one, in my experience, is quite a fascinating and even sensitive issue. So we are quite sensitive about talking about being sensitive. Okay, over to Lynn.
New Buddha Way lets go of East and West and starts afresh in the life we have now. For more information, visit www.newbuddhaway.org.